Okay, so welcome everybody, and I'll let Jacob start this class. Your
Yeah,
Bavakasha.
yeah. I'll say to start that it's definitely the same Siman, but I think there are a bunch of different topics. So it's not quite continuing the same topic. But yeah, um, if if somebody wants to start us off by reading the tour on You'd Bet, on See If You'd Bet. Ruben?
Sure, I'd be happy to. You'd bet the Torah and you'd bet.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. אסור לחתוך ירק דק שדומה לתוכן. Okay, so it's forbidden to cut vegetables very finely because it resembles tochen grinding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And since that's a bit short, do you want to get us started on the Beit Yosef a little?
Yeah, that was a short one. Sure, happily.
Yeah.
Okay. Should I start with Tanya B'Tosefta or go right to Asor Lachtoch?
We can skip the Tanya B'Tosefta for now. Yeah.
Okay.
What Siman are we?
Oh, we're Siman Shin Chaf Aleph.
Okay, so we're ahead. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Beis Yosef. אסור לחתוך הירק דק וכולי. בפרק כלל גדול אמר רב פאפא, היימן דפריס סילקה, חייב משום תוכן, ופירש רש"י, פריס מחתכו הדק. Okay, so we have a Mimra in Perek Klal Gadol, where Rav Papa says, and this is the Rashi's explanation, that somebody who finely chops beets is chayav because of tochen. והתוספות כתבו דווקא בסילקה שייך טחינה, אבל שאר אוכלים, which word?
It's not Paris, it's Parim or Parim.
Oh, Parim. Okay. Oh, Parim. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
והתוספות כתבו דווקא בסילקה שייך טחינה, אבל שאר אוכלים שרי. The Tosfot write at least in one of their comments that this is just about, it's dafka beets that we're concerned about trina if they're chopped finely, but not for other types of food. It's permitted to chop them finely. Ubesof perek eluk sharim katfu atosfot ahad share hatam knivat yerek biyom kippurim v'lo dami lahad amrinan hatam beperek klal gadol hayman de parim silka chayav mishum tochen dahatam mayrik she'oseh chatichot dakot me'od והכה מייריק שעושה חתיכות גדולות. All right, I'll pause there. But in another section, the Tosfot write about the permissibility of, I think Knevat Yerek it's like trimming the ends off of vegetables. You're not really chopping them per se. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was how I understood it. Like kind of cutting them to make them look nicer, but not really chopping them up to cook them in any way.
Okay. So this case of trimming or cutting your vegetables on Yom Kippur is permitted, and it's not similar to what we said about the other case in Klal Gadol, where somebody is finely chopping beets, in which case they're chayav because of tochen, because in the Yom Kippurim case, you're making big cuts. You're not making lots of small fine cuts.
Yeah.
Should I keep going?
Yeah, we can finish this section, I guess, maybe.
Okay. Should I read until the Harosh, or I can just keep going?
Until the yeah.
Okay. והגהות מימון בפרק כ"א כתבו דברי התוספות, ואחר כך כתבו, והרב רבנו יוסף פירש בשם רשב"ם, דלחם מותר לפרר מאחר שנטחן כבר, דלא מצינו תוכן אחר תוכן. Okay, so the Hagahot Maimon writes, he gives over the same opinion as the Tosfot, but then he writes in the name of Harav Rabbeinu Yosef, who writes in the name of Rashbam, that you can, my understanding is that after bread has been ground, you can crumble it even more. I think.
My understanding of it, I wasn't sure if it was like, I think actually we'll see when we look at the Shulchan Aruch and commentaries on that it's after, so the wheat was ground for the bread, then it's baked, and then since it's already been ground before in the process of making the bread, there's not going to be grinding afterward.
So any bread,
Okay.
any bread you're allowed to crumble.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Including, say, a slice of bread that you cut for yourself. You can, because the wheat was ground in the process of making it, you can, yeah, because there's no tchina achar tchina, according to his opinion. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
As opposed to rice crackers. Interesting, if you think about it. Rice crackers are not ground, they're just puffed. So those would be maybe different.
Yeah.
And those are very crumbly by nature.
Yeah.
You mean like rice, what I would call rice cakes, meaning not super processed, just puffed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I can just finish up. There's just a little bit left here in this section. So he writes that you can't. Well, so here lefarer, I wasn't sure what lefarer meant for perot. Is it? It's also to sort of crush or crumble, or is it to? Are you using a knife? I think you're crushing.
I wasn't fully sure. I think the more important thing we learn from this is that there's this perspective of like we're gonna get to the lav, the silka lav davka.
Right.
That's the more important thing we're learning.
Okay.
Because whatever the mechanism of our perot berurin, it will be under Tchina or Doma Tchina.
Okay. So whatever it looks exactly like, it would be under Tchina, or if there's a chashash of Tchina. But he writes that it's not permitted to do this with fruit. Mashma desfira lahu desilka lavdavka. Right. So we can infer from that according to his opinion, silka is lavdavka. The high svara de Rashbam katva smag vegam haran vehamordechai beperek klal gadol.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is
so
just to
far,
say.
I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, you say what you.
No, I was just going to translate the last line, but I don't know if I need to. Sorry.
Yeah, it's just that's citation saying who's holding what. So far the ideas are pretty straightforward. Oh, Rob Joel.
Yeah, I want to ask about the Torah's language after all that. I mean, we're gonna get more, but and it's just different from the Shulchan Aruch's language, right? Because the Torah says asur lachtoch hayera kidak shedomel tochen, but it doesn't say. It sounds like it's domel tochen. It seems like it is tochen. It's chayav, right? So either he paskins that maybe only silka and not other things, or I don't know. I'm not sure what's going on with his language there. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't use that language. I think the Shulchan Aruch says like misha chotech hayera dak chayav. Right, which is what I would expect.
Maybe he means that's a tolda.
Could be, but it's like that sounds like really soft language for like a tolda's chayav still.
Yeah.
The pula the pulot are different. The pula of dak as opposed to grinding is different. The totzah is the same.
Yeah,
as much as possible. And so I think he's saying, I think he means Doma, because it's not, you don't have the same pula. You have the same totzah, but you don't have the same pula. I
Yeah.
think he means Doma.
So.
I
All right.
I wonder if you could read it like biderech shedomeh letochen and like
Mhm.
really load that shin with much more than it usually would be doing. Something like that.
Why not? Sounds pretty
Yeah.
But is it impossible that he doesn't paskin like Rashi? Is it possible that he paskins like Rashi and is saying derabanan doma letochen for the other vegetables?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, if you notice, right, I just want to read the Shulchan Aruch, "Hamechatech hayerak dak dak, chayav mishum tochen," right? That's like the language I wanted the Torah to use, is the Shulchan Aruch language here.
Yeah.
In fact, he changes it from the Torah. It's just kind of
What's
so
really
interesting.
bothering you is the asur versus the chayav.
Exactly. I want to
Yeah.
see it. I want to see him write chayav, and he doesn't write that. It's,
Yeah.
So put it all together, Joel.
either the tour is possibly like Rashi and thinks it's only dafka silka and therefore all other vegetables are just the Rabbanan, or it was a style that he wrote in, like you were saying, and he didn't mean it so that it's not chayav. And maybe the tour writes in Shin Aleph. He's not so concerned about what's derabanan and what's deraita. He's just concerned about, is it asur or not, right? Because he says in our world it doesn't matter so much. So.
Okay. I think Doma is a pretty strong word, but I'll get off the topic.
No, maybe
I think
I-
he's Mechaber. We said Doma.
Yeah.
Doma.
Good. I think we dealt with my problem. I just wanted to bring it up.
Yeah. Okay.
No, it was something that I thought about. I think, and I'm not sure, I don't remember all things exactly, but we might see, like, in later in the Beit Yosef, we might see like Nira Ketochen or some come up that might add a little bit more depth to what we're thinking about here. But I don't remember exactly. That's part of why I had paused on focusing on the Doma token, but you're right to point it out. I think we can skip the part of the Beit Yosef, the rush. But does someone want to continue with the Rambam as we're exploring more of this? Well, a lot of details with Tochen, but in particular the understanding of what vegetables are included under it. So, Ori, would you like to continue?
Sure. והרמב"ם כתב בפרק כ"א, המחתך את הירק דק דק כדי לבשלו, הרי זה תולדת תוכן. So the Rambam says someone who cuts a vegetable very, very finely in order to cook it, that is a toledet tochen, וחייב. לפיכך אין מרסקין לא את השחת ולא את החרובין לפני הבהמה, מפני שנראה כתוכן. I mean, this is a perfect example of how the language gets blended immediately, right? He's very clear as chayav, but therefore you can't crush any kind of vegetables, carobs. I'm not sure what the shachat is for an animal that looks like tochen, nira kitochen. But I assume he's putting that under the same statute as the previous one. It's toledet tochen. He's just calling it nira.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, but I'm not sure.
Well, maybe not, because maybe you're not thinking that you'd come to cook, right? I think that's the
Right. The first one was in the process of cooking, and the second example was crushing for the animals, where you're dafka not going to cook it. Okay, I guess the lefikach is interesting. It's like this is an example of the toledet tochen doraita, and therefore here's an example of not the exact same thing, but the nira kitochen dimension. We're asking about the shachat or the charuvin. All right, should I continue?
Yeah.
כתב, בפרק זין כתב, המחתך את הירק מעט לבשלו, הרי זה חייב. If you cut a vegetable even a little for the process of cooking, this is also chayiv. Shezo hamelacha toledet tchina. Oh, sorry, no. Me'at here meaning also dak. Mechatech et hayarek me'at levoshlo is another way of saying dak dak.
Yeah,
It must be if it's
realizing I
toledet tchina again.
Yeah, I think it's doc. I realized that I hadn't thought about that. What mi'at meant. But I think doc is what makes the most sense here.
Yeah, it's a similar statement because it's toledet tchina.
Yeah.
Nira shehu ze leshono מפרש דווקא נקת סילקה שחותכין אותה דק דק לבישול. So he explains that they specifically took out silka because when you cut it very finely for cooking. והוא הדין לשאר ירקות, and this is the same law for other vegetables שחותכין אותו דק דק לבישול. So it's sort of broadening the category of silka to all vegetables that one would cut finely for cooking. And it's possible that even if you were to eat them as they are raw, since you cut them for the purpose of cooking, finally for the purpose of cooking, you're still chayev. But if you cut them finely to eat them raw, then in that case you wouldn't be chayev for tochen. It's really only tochen in the process of cooking. And maybe it's not even an Isur derabanan in that case. Because that is not the way of tchina. Tchina is considered in the process of cooking in this way of thinking. V'hainu dichdei lomar demit yasar leraskan midrabanan. And in order to say that it would be asur to crush them from midrabanan, mishum demechze ketochen. That could be it looks like tochen. Ahadar shachat v'charuvin in the case of shachat v'nifnei behema, the ones that you crushed for the animal that he said b'meforash not to do. That derabanan comes from mechze ketochen, as we saw in the Rambam Shanira ketochen. Umihu yesh lidchot delishna. It's hard for me to find the next line. Umihu yesh lidchot delishna dematnitin deperach mishehichshik nakat ubeperek mefanim gabe hadetanya chavile peya ve'ezov. So umihu yesh lidchot, and therefore we need to.
Mihu is however, so this is going to be posing a challenge to what we've just said about
from the Rambam.
Yeah.
So if we look in these other sources in Perek Mishehichshich and Perek Mefanin, Gabeha Tanya Chavile Pea Ve'ezov V'kotem Biyad V'ochel Ubilvad Shelo Yiktom B'kli. So in that case, as long as you crush them in your hand, but you don't use a kli. Perish Rashi Shelo Yiktom B'kli Keder Chol. Because that's the way that you do grinding during the week. Kedamrinan man de parim silka dami letochen. Like we said, bringing the example of parim de simcha, that is similar to tochen. Mashma midvarav de lo mechayav ela kede. So it seems from his words, de lo mechayav ela kede parim bekli davka aval parim biyad lo. Umihu efshar di isur derabanan miha ika. Okay, so from Rashi and the other texts, it made it seem that it would only have been, even in our case, an issue if you use a kli to do that crushing. But if you do it by hand, it would not be asur. And that's how we see that isur derabanan miha, that there should still be a isur derabanan even by hand.
Right. Or at least theoretically there should be. It's not coming down firmly either way, but we should probably act as if there is. Yeah.
Right, according to the Rambam, but it was Rashi who we saw in the other case that
Mhm.
that essentially just said the kli is an issue of kederech chol.
Exactly. Yeah.
Want
Yeah.
to keep going?
How about we switch? Yeah, there's a lot of videos safe on this tiny sif. Max, would you like to continue?
Sure. The Trumas Adeshan, right? That's what we're up to?
Yes.
All right. V'kasa b'Trumas Adeshan, Siman Sarivav, de Basar Mevushal Otzli, Modu Kule Alma, de Sharu Lechascho Dakdak Besakin, Velo Dami Le'itzim, Uleperos, Velechem, de Inhu Kulhu Gidule Karka. V'yesh b'minam tchina, kagon tzvua v'kitnios de'ikar tchina shayach ba. Aval basar, de ein gidula min haaretz, yesh lomar de be'ochel kazeh kuli amalo shayach be tchina. Okay, so meat doesn't have the same sort of properties as wood or fruit or anything like that, and so it's tchina is not shayach. Okay, and everyone agrees about that. Ve'afilu mi she'eino yachol lil'os eli im ken yachtoch sharei de'azlinan bataruba de'alma omnam ein nir'eh lahatir mita'am zeh lachtoch basar chai dak l'tzorech ofos la'achilan de'o'il ve'ena basar kach ra'ui la'achila ela lachus oso de'lo ke'orche ika lememar de'hadehitira tosfos litchon ochlin Hainu mishum she'in sarich tchina. Okay, so even if there's a case of someone who can't chew on meat unless it's cut up really finely, we go after majority of the people in the world who
I'll just pause and add here
yeah.
What we skipped earlier with the Tanya B'Tosefta, it talks about specifically not being able to chop things for elders, presumably because they would have trouble chewing. So that's where we're getting this idea of people who can't chew. And it's prohibited to chop things for elders in that Tosefta.
Right. Right, and you might have thought that Rav Nachum, were you about to?
I just excited a side point. What we said before about cutting the vegetables ma'at. So I looked it up in Girsat Venezia. It's ma'at.
Mm-hmm.
It's like dak. So that explains that.
The same.
Yeah, no, I saw Joel put in the chat that his Girsa had me'at. Yeah. Max, you can continue.
Okay. So you might have thought that you could use that permission also to chop up raw meat really finely in order to feed to animals. But it doesn't seem like we can do that. Because right, this is only, right, we saw this in terms of the shochet lechola, I think was where this came up. That this meat, you can chew on it. And so wait, let me just right, and that's not right, it's not the normal way that you would you would eat meat. So you could say that the Tosfos's permission to wait, what was this? Right, is because that food didn't need tchina in the first place.
Yeah.
And that you could eat it raw. It's just not normal to do so.
Yeah.
If the act that you're doing is creating it, it's almost like food preparation. Before you couldn't eat it, now you can. That's really what tochen is, as opposed to just taking something that like
Right.
I can already eat it. I'm just grinding it up small. It's not tochen.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Aval ilav haitama lo. But if you couldn't eat it even raw or even in its non-ground up form, then this doesn't apply. V'tu mishum diyesh lanu ligabe mishum shavye ochel levehema. We saw this last week, I think. Mishum mitrach beochlin levehema kehahi deperek misha hechshich adkan lishono. That right. There's also the issue of mashve ochel levehema, that you're like really prepping food for that animal, and that it's a big tircha to do that, and so. For those reasons, you can't permit chopping up raw meat for animals, even though you can chop up cooked meat for human beings.
Yeah. Do you want to continue with the Harashba?
Sure. Ve'arashba kasav b'tshuva dehad parim silka davka b'mechat tech kedela achlo lamachar o af levo b'yom ula achar sha'a lefi shederach silka lechascho dak dak bishas bishulo. V'kol shedarko b'chach umenicho la'achar sha'a ha le'ochlo miyad sharei shelo asru ala ha'adam le'echol ma'achalo chasichos gedolos o ktanos. Okay, so the Rashba brings in that the Rav Papa in the Gemara there, when he's talking about cutting up beets, that's only when you're cutting them up for some later time. But because usually you cut up the beets and then you wait until it's time to cook them and then you cook them. But if you're cutting them up finely to eat immediately, that like you can eat food in the size of a piece of, the size of food you want to eat food. Ukadamrina beperek klal gadol hayu lefanav shnei minin borer ve'ochel le'alter borer mniach le'alter ulevo b'yom lo yivror v'im birer na'aseh kavor le'oter v'chayav chatas. Right, so bringing us back to the borer language. De alma kol she'ochel miyad kederach shebnei adam ochlim. Afal pi sheyesh be'oso tzad be'atzmo chiyav chatas k'shemeniach la'achar zman va'af levo v'yom mutar. Right, that even if you're separating something that has a chiyuv chatas element to it, were you to leave it out for too long and not eat it immediately, there still is a way for you to do a malacha, either in that case borer or in this case tochen, in a mutter way because you're eating it immediately.
Right. I think we're particularly seeing the Rashba bring the borer case as the source for this idea. What we learned by borer, the Rashba saying we can apply to tochen as well. Just being technical about like where we're sourcing this argument of Rashba.
Does it seem like he's sourcing it from there, or is he just sort of giving himself some backup? Like, I don't know exactly how to read that Ukida Amrinan. At first I thought it was just like, oh, we have something similar somewhere else. But I wasn't reading it exactly as this source, but maybe it could be.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I think the thing with the Rashba started when they were saying the reason silka is mentioned is because that's the kind of thing you would cut up, leave,
Right.
and get ready for cooking. Maybe there's even a part of the I wasn't sure about this, but part of the process that leaving it out is part of the cooking prep. You wouldn't, slice it and then throw it in the bowl. You leave it for an hour or longer in order to, I don't know, soften it up or something. Air it out. I don't know. And that's why he sort of was able to understand from that was really the ikar of the isur. That of course and then he starts thinking, oh, but if you cut it to eat immediately, shouldn't that be okay? And shouldn't that be similar to the borer case?
And then and then he's also, I think he's really dealing with a kasha that a person might have, which is ma pitom. Just because I do it for right away, it's mutter. You're not allowed to. If you're writing a letter for right now, you're not allowed to do it. It doesn't matter if it's for now or for later. And so he's saying, well, I can give you another example of a different malacha that also has the same principle. So don't be so surprised.
Yeah, that makes more.
We have this concept. Maybe it's not everywhere, but it certainly could be in some places wherever we have reason to say it.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on that. It's not that waiting makes it mutter. It's that the process that we consider, the process that we're envisioning for the Isser in the first place is one that involves, doing something for later. But when you do it immediately, you're not really doing the malacha. That's not the malacha. It's defined in this case, doing it for later. In these two cases, potentially.
In these two cases, exactly. But not in the case of writing, not in the case of lighting a fire, all this.
Yeah.
But then you think about why. Why?
Yeah.
Because people would store, you usually wouldn't grind flour. I think I would say like this. You wouldn't usually grind flour to make bread right then and there. Usually you'd grind a bunch of flour and then have, a couple kilos of flour. And then when you want to make bread, you have the flour. And the next time when you run out, you grind some more. But you don't grind it for immediate use. That's not the normal behavior. And also maybe by borer, you're creating a cleaned up. You don't borer 1 cup of rice. You borer, because again you're going to grind it to make flour. You don't borer 1 cup of wheat. You borer a quantity so you have it ready. You store it. When you run out, you'll do it again.
I'm going to push. I actually don't think it's even that, Rav Nachum. I think it's that you don't borer to eat and you don't tochen to eat. And here, like the borer, when you're selecting it to put in your mouth or put on your plate to put on your mouth, right? But it's like pretty quick, right? That's eating. And the same thing here, if you're cutting it up as just like part of the chewing process, right? You're gonna chew. You could have just chewed it, but you're like, all right, it's a little bit easier if I cut it up, and so I'm gonna cut it up. That's eating. That's not tochen anymore, and that's as opposed to what's tochen. Tochen is to grind flour to make bread, right? To eventually cook it into something. You cut to cook. Here, you're not cutting to cook. You're cutting to eat, and that's
What would you say about lash? What would you say about lash? Could I, on my plate, mix two dry? Like, could I mix some powdered tahina with water and make some nice tahina on my plate? So I'm about to eat it.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we're going to say in small amounts, yes, but maybe you do it with the shinoi, right? So it's interesting why lash we don't just say like if you immediately are going to eat it, you can do it. But
I would answer because you normally do lash on a small quantity.
Yeah,
that's the way I was explaining it. But
as opposed to tochen, which you usually do in big quantities. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're saying a different idea. You're saying it's because anything on your plate is part of the eating process.
Mm-hmm.
It's still say that maybe it's not called eating process. You're preparing it for eating, and it's not eating it.
Yeah.
By lash. I don't know.
But just to clarify, you couldn't do real clear tochen just to eat, could you? Immediately?
Well,
I thought that because the Silka case was a little bit removed from classical tochen. This is cutting.
Grind pepper. You can't take a pepper mill and grind pepper on your food to eat it.
That's why I was thinking this is about Silka as there's some dome the tochen here, and that, by the way, brings us back to the tour. By the way, why did he say shadom the tochen? This isn't tochen mamish. This is, I guess, toledet tochen. But this type of toledet is not going to apply to take a bite immediately. But normal tochen applies, right? I can't grind and then eat if it's true grinding with a kli.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. The kli is a big difference, and seemingly a knife isn't quite a kli here in the same way that a cheese grater is going to be a kli or a grinder, pepper grinder will be a kli, right? Which is there for sure. It's same thing we'll see with salt, right? You can maybe crush it with like a pot, but you can't, use a salt grinder on Shabbos.
Yeah. Right. And I think we don't need to go in too much detail about the next section of Beit Yosef and Sinu. But I think it does get this idea that like vegetables are somewhat different than regular grinding. It builds on that. But then we get the end of it, even with all these caveats that we've given about, caveats about like the timing, etc. We get the end of Nimtzinu. Mikol makom nachon hadavar lazhir she'achom v'chatikot gedolot kitzat v'sheyochlu alter v'chol shai gavna nira delate beit michus devrei kol. In any case, the right thing to do is to be careful that you cut them into pieces that are a little bit bigger than you might otherwise. And then you eat immediately. And if you do it in this way, no one would say there's anything to worry about. So I think it's saying, yes, we have these things that you probably could technically chop things up finely and eat it immediately, but let's be careful.
He's posek very stringently considering the Rambam and the Rashba. He says, "I have mishum tochein, no nira, no dome, no miyad." So I'm not sure exactly. Maybe you can fill in how he ended up sort of rejecting those more Mikil views.
I'm not completely sure why we ended up rejecting the Mako views. Especially,
Issue d'oraita. It's a potential issue d'oraita. We should be worry about the more machmir opinions. Also, no.
Although I'll say that there are the ways that we have, we could look at Borer, where we have where it does get technical, but we have this mechanism we say where you can separate things out. So,
but that's only good, right? We have like several conditions: good from the bad, the alter, and biyat.
Yeah.
So too here.
Yeah.
Not too small is one of the conditions.
Exactly. Okay.
Where's a practical example of this? Sometimes people chop up onions for, let's say, egg salad, or potato salad, or tuna salad. So when you're chopping your onions, you keep them not as small as you might normally do. Joel, you wanted to?
No, I think you also there's no loss here, right? If you you stay away from Easter right? There's not a big loss. Okay, so you chop the vegetables a little bit more. It's maybe even a shinui, right? That you've stuck in there, like you will for lash. This is the way I always learned it, and I know Rachel always says we got to chop a little bit bigger, right? For Shabbos, and it's like okay, so for Shabbos you do a little bit. You chop cucumbers for salad. You do a little bit bigger chunks than you would usually do, and it's like, what did you lose? Nothing. Everyone knows it's the Shabbos chopping, so. And you do it right before the meal as opposed to, which we'll get into, I'm sure, right? We've seen this, but like, what is it right before? Like, you don't do it in the morning and then come home. You do it like after shul. You chop up the vegetables, while people are kibitzing before for lunch or something like that. So.
Does someone want to just read the Shulchan Aruch on Yud Bet, and then I think we'll go back to Yud Aleph after that. Josie, I don't think I've called on you yet. So do you want to? Read?
So we're starting off similar to, but not exactly like the Torah. Hamahatech hayarek dak dak hayav mishun tochen. So it just comes out and says you're chayav because of tochen, which is similar to, I think, the Rambam's language as well. Haga v'hu adin da asur lachtoch grogorot v'charuvim lifnei zikinim, which quotes the Beit Yosef, quoting the Tosefta. V'davka perod v'chadome lezeh asur. So this is so the Ramah here is coming to say, and in addition, you can't cut things up finely for people who have difficulty chewing, and specifically for fruit and things that are like that, and they're asur. Aval mutar lefarer lechem livnei hatarnagolim. Tehoyel kvar nitchan ein lachush. The ein tochen achar tochen. And so here you can crumble up. You can rip up or crumble up bread, to feed your chickens, because there's no idea that there's going to be there's no suspicion of tochen, because there's no tochen after tochen. And here we're quoting the Hagot Maimoniot and a whole list of other people as well, the Ran, the Smag. B'chol zeh lo mayri ele b'chotech umaniach. Aval im lo achlol miyad hakol sharei. Midi dehave avorer le'achol miyad desharei. Deleel siman shin yotet. So here he's coming with this big exception to say, and all of this is if you're cutting them, putting them aside, but if you're eating it right away, if you're cutting it up to eat right away, it's all right, because it's similar to the idea of borer that we've talked about in Shin Yud Tet. So he's making this explicit connection to what we spoke about before. You're sort of separating the part of the meat you want from the part of the meat you don't, or the vegetable or whatever. So, do you want me to continue with the Magen Avraham here?
Yeah, I think we don't need to look too much at Yud Daled. That does give room that for the case of cutting up the charuvim, it gives room that if you're not cutting them up for zakanim, then it's permitted to, if people can chew, then you can cut them up. But Het Vav L'Chol Miyad has some important points, because I want to introduce that with the, I would say that with the Ramah, there's a little bit of ambiguity of like what he is referring back to with Aval Im L'Chol Miyad. Is he referring back to even Hamechatech Hayarek Dak Dak? That and make it so we can go back to what we learned from the Rashba, and that you don't need to worry about making the pieces a little bigger.
So yeah. Starting off with this, he said, "Le'achol miyad o shanatarligim yochol miyad sharei lachtoch." He's quoting the Ran, so or in the same sense, you can, if you're immediately feeding your chickens, you can break up the bread. Because they didn't forbid people from eating big pieces or small pieces. You want to cut up your meat small or your vegetables small, you go for it. This is just the way of eating. He puts the Beit Yosef. Al hayeter zeh, v'gam harav Beit Yosef katav, v'zaher lachtoch lahatichot gedolot k'tzat ein sham. So the Shultei Giburim and the Beit Yosef are suggesting to do like Rav Joel was mentioning. Maybe you should just be careful and cut things a little bit bigger than you would normally. Aval b'midatenu nahagu lachtoch hatznon dak dak me'od v'yesh lahem al mishim smechu ve'al kol panim asur la'asot ad yitziat beit knesset v'yinan samuch l'tuda mamash k'mo shekatav Reish Siman Shin Yutet. So if you're going to be cutting up, sorry, I'm blanking on Snon.
Radishes.
Radishes. If you're cutting up your radishes, finally, in our countries we cut up radishes finally, but you're not supposed to do it until after you've left shul, because you're supposed to do it right next to you're eating your meals. So it's more like eating and less like preparation.
Yeah.
As we have in the beginning of Shin Yotet, became mashma baran sof perek tetvav.
Yeah.
So all of these, there's a time element to these things. There needs to be something of a miyad in addition to the liyad. To paraphrase once again, Rav Joel.
Yeah.
You seem to have a gift for aphorism.
Yes, and I'm guessing, there's still perhaps a level of ambiguity over what we should take as suck, or how finely you can cut, if it's immediately before a meal, but presumably, on Thursday people will learn from Rav Joel and when he teaches from the Mishnah Berurah. Yeah. Josie, do you want to go back and do Yud Aleph in the Shulchan Aruch?
Okay. In the Shulchan Aruch, mutar lahashgot et hatalush kedei shelo yichmosh. So you can keep your cut vegetables moist or wet, or dunk them in some water so that they don't wilt. I'm going to go with kamoshes like wilting. So I guess if you cut up your celery stalks, you can stick them in some water so that they don't turn into soft celery.
Yeah.
That's
Rav Joel.
I have so many. I went down this rabbit hole once, but I just want to throw. There's so many questions on this because, in Shin Lamed Vav Yud Bet Yud Aleph, right? The Shulchan Aruch says Hasharech Chitim V'Sarim Kiaseh Behem B'Mayim Harei Zeh Toledet Zoreah V'Chayav B'Chol Shu, right? Which maybe is because those things still have flowers on them or things that can grow. But then also we have a thing in Sukkah. Where is that? It's in Tafresh Nun Dalid, right? That you're allowed to on Yom Tov put the lulav back in water, but you can't put it from the beginning in water, right? You can't you put new water in. And here it sounds like maybe you can. So I'm not sure. There's a prima gadim I need to go down the road of, but I just want to throw that out there. This is it's interesting that no one seems to comment here on this.
I mean, with the lulav question, is this a matter of something that you're actually? I mean, are you going to be eating your lulav?
No, and so maybe that's why maybe it's matak and mana, but
But this is lashkot. This is not to put it in a vessel. It's just to sprinkle it with water.
To pour it, but doesn't that sound like putting water lechatchila, I mean, on it?
That you maybe could do that even with a lulav.
Yeah, so you could pour
In other
water
words,
on it,
what you're talking about
or
the
even
lulav is putting it into a vase. But
Mhm.
here we're talking about sprinkling on it.
Or I've seen people take, wet paper towels and wrap them around their lulav, which is moist paper towels, not wet, but moist, which is something
Yeah.
that's really, really common to sort of to keep the leaves from rotting as quickly as they usually do.
So, but I imagine, right, would you say like if it's talush but it has flowers on it, right, still, that would seem to be in Shin Lamed Vav to be problematic, right? To put water on it, as opposed to like if it's just like a piece of parsley. Uh,
What exactly does it say in Shin Lamed Vav?
it says, right, Hasharech hitim userim v'chetze behem b'mayim harezeh toledet zoreah v'chayav b'chol shehu.
This is different language. It's soaking. That's soaking. This is sprinkling.
Yeah, I mean the Rama does say that he says umutar lehamin anfei ilanot b'mayim b'Shabbat u'levad shelo yiyu bahem prachim v'shoshanim. Right.
The
So
Magen Avraham seems to be saying it's because you're going to eat them today. I don't know if that's in common to what you're saying, but he's adding that. Ru'im la'achila biyoman mutar ashkotan keder shmutar l'tatzalan.
mhm.
Yeah.
Masha'in came b'davar she'ino rayu la'achila. So maybe that was where he's dividing the line to your point.
Yeah.
Then I
Well, the other example is chitin and so'orin, which I guess is it's not rawi. It's food products, but it's not rawi
Not
la'achila.
Rawi. Yeah. Good. That's it. So, no, I
So I'll
appreciate
have-
you answering my question. This comes up sometimes, right? You have, like you have some parsley that you want to keep in water for Shabbos, right? And you like, can I take it out, take some of it out, put it back on Shabbos to keep it to keep it from getting bad. Maybe even for the same meal. Just don't want to keep it. I think it's a good question. I don't know. It comes up in my life a lot. That's why I'm pushing on this. So.
And I'm just gonna ask, what about the case of edible flowers?
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, they're good. That's
That's enough to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if our Rebbeim have practices they want to share about their thoughts about this, but
Like artichokes,
you put artichokes in water, is that a thing? Is that,
I don't know, but they're edible flowers.
oh, they are. Okay. That's
I think we don't. Well, we can. I'll talk briefly about Magen Avram Anya Aleph. It's not real. Well, we learned some important things out of it, not strictly about food, but about how we can, for certain things that certain purposes for them would be muktzah, we can still, or certain actions would normally be seen as muktzah, we can do things like clean them or make them smell nicer. Yeah. But it's not strictly about food, so I don't know if it's as on theme. Yeah, I think let's go back to the tour. I think we'll get Yud Gimel. We'll learn Yud Gimel, Seafood Gimel, and then we'll take a break and then continue and learn a lot about Lush. So, does anyone, well, Atar, are you up to reading? Or I think you're on mute.
I don't feel familiar enough with it to
Very fair. very fair. Yeah. Ruben, do you want to read your Gimel?
Certainly. Okay. V'asur lirdot dvash me'akaveret shedome letolesh. So it's forbidden to extract honey from a beehive because it resembles tolesh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, we have the language of Doma that we're thinking about. Point that out. Do you want to read the Beit Yosef as well?
Actually, I was hoping to run to the bathroom really
Oh,
quick. I'm sorry.
okay.
Very
No worries.
inconveniently timed. Is that all right? I'm sorry.
I can take over for my chabrusa.
Thank
Wonderful.
you. Thank you, Max.
Okay. All right. Besof perek hamatzniya tanu Rabbanan hachalev v'chulei v'harodeh chalos dvash shagag b'shabbos chayav chatas hizid biyom tov lokeh mishum lokeh arba'im divrei Rabbi Eliezer. V'chachamim omrim echad zeh ve'echad zeh ino ela mishum shvus. Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer says that if you remove the honeycomb on Shabbos b'shogeg, it's chayav chatas, and if you're mazid on Yom Tov, you get lashes. But Chachamim say that it's only a shvus in any event. Okay. Upasa karambam beper kaf aleph ke Chachamim. Rambam paskins that it's a shvus. V'kasav hagahos mamanios b'shem harashba b'med v'rim amorim bizman shedvukos b'kaveres v'tzarich lirdos lafi shenir ek ke'oker davar migudulo. Okay, so this opinion is that this is only talking about when the honey is like really davuk, really attached, really. I know there's a better word to the
Stuck?
Stuck. Yeah. To the beehive. And you need to really like extract, really separate, because that looks like you are removing something from from its growing.
I'll point out here that confusingly the doma seems to be about like what it looks like rather than it being framed as tolda. So we don't have a clear understanding of how linguistically to understand things when the word doma comes up.
Mhm.
Yeah. Ori?
I was just saying, where the tour was being makil like Rashi.
Yeah.
In the previous instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Max, you can continue.
Okay. Aval niflashim akveres v'chein dvash hatzaf b'kaveres mutter. But if it had been detached from the beehive, or if the honey was floating in the beehive, then it's mutter to remove it.
I think
The kach divrei Tosfos, is that something like that?
Saying that
Chein das, okay. V'chein das Tosfos per kira v'chein moreh lashon rabbeinu she'eno ne'asar k'she'eno tzarich rudiya ad kan lashono. So if it doesn't really need like full extraction, then it's not usur. V'had deshari litol dvash hatzaf b'kaveres davka b'shezav me'erev Shabbos. Aval im zav b'Shabbos pshita she'asur. Eli im kain risek hechalos me'erev Shabbos u'kamoshnis be'er b'shimen shinkaf. And the permission to remove floating honey from beehive is when it had already started to flow before Shabbos. But if it started on Shabbos, then it's usur unless you unless you had already chopped up the honeycomb, in which case it's talush to begin with when Shabbos starts, and it doesn't necessarily need to start flowing immediately.
Right, and this gets the idea of, well, it's the idea of nolad, which is something that's formed on Shabbos or Yom Tov, which is muktzah. Yeah, I think we don't need to, for timing purposes, we won't. I don't know if we need to look at the Shulchan Aruch or the Magen Avraham. I'll say that there's this aspect brought up in the Magen Avraham of there could be this, it's maybe because it's not immediately ready for eating, there's this other challenge to it because there's wax in it, and so you have to be careful not to do borer if you're getting the honey after crushing it. I think we'll take a break now for 5 minutes, and then yeah. Does anyone want to start us out reading Yudalid in the Torah? And we'll do things in a bit of a different order than usual, where we'll look at the Shulchan Aruch and the Prisha, just because there are some terms that understanding specifically what they mean helps clarify. Yeah.
I'm happy to read since my Chevros had to step in for me.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. But starting in the Torah first?
Yeah.
Okay. So starting with Yudalit. Okay. Kemach shel klayot shenityabesh b'tanor ve'osin mimenu shtita. Im hieva asur legavla harbe biyachad ela me'at me'at. Let me pause for a second. So this is a flour. This is some sort of flour that is roasted in an oven. And a flour that's roasted in an oven in order to make shtita, which is some sort of beverage. It's like mixed, it's like roasted grain and honey and something and water, I think. It's some sort of beverage.
Yeah. I mean, there's the definition, I don't know if there are different things. Is it like a beverage? Is it a type of like other mixture? But like we have the Prisha, which says as Shemen umayim umelach murbo, so as oil and water and salt. So it might be more like a sauce or a dip of some sort with those ingredients, but I don't fully know. And I think it's that the wait, no, never mind. I was gonna say I think it's the kilayot that are roasted, although it's grammatically, I think, hemach sinit yabesh, because otherwise it would have to be plural to correspond to the kilayot.
Oh, I see. Okay, I was reading it.
So you were right. You were right
Okay.
with saying it's the flour that's roasted, at least if we go by grammar. We'll see. I think some commentators might talk about it being the Kelly that's roasted, but yeah.
Right. Which is another type of flour, right?
I'm not.
No,
I think Kelly is grain, maybe
Klayot is just
parched
parched grain, right?
Parched
Right? That's the it's roasted grain, I think.
Okay. So that
Roast.
might be what's roasted then after all, even the grammar doesn't.
Yeah, and then you grind it up into a flour afterwards, I think. Is the way.
Yeah.
So this might actually be flour made of roasted grain. So maybe it's not entirely clear, but it's some sort of mixture of flour. Either the flour itself is roasted in the oven, or it's a flour made from parched grain that's roasted or parched in the oven, and then mixed with oil and water and salt. You can't make if the mixture is thick, then you can't knead a lot of it at once on Shabbos. Rather, just a little bit at a time.
So I want to look what's important to look at for now with the Shulchan Aruch is I just want to flip and see im goblin, so you can't do this govel or gibel thing. Perush, so it's a got the Perush Nitinat Mayim Bekemach Nikra gibel. It's so we're saying that gibel is specifically the adding of liquid, not necessarily any physical mixing, but the adding of liquid. Yeah. Oh, Max, are you raising your hand? Or
Yeah, I wanted to say it reminded me of the Mishnah in Gittin, one of the Darchei Shalom clauses about helping an Am Haaretz woman make bread, but the moment that you need to stop is the moment when the water is poured. And so it just seems like a little bit of a parallel of water pouring being like right at the edge of, machzikin, yedei avira.
Well, I think that's because that's when the hechsher tuma comes in, right? Is when once you need the liquid, right? V'chi tan mayim, in order to make it, and the whole point of the amhar is she'll be tmeah.
Right, is that it's tara.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. The point here is we're going to get to this question of what actually is kneading. Does it start with just adding liquid, or is it really physically mixing the liquid in some way? Yeah. Ruben, you can continue.
Okay. Okay, ואם היא רכה, מותר לגבלה הרבה ביחד על ידי שינוי. ומהו השינוי? שייתן קמח תחילה ואחר כך חומץ, שבכל דרך ליתן החומץ תחילה. Okay, so if the mixture is sort of loose or soft, I guess soft, then it's permitted to knead a great amount of it at once by means of a shinui. And what's the shinui? You put the flour in first and then the vinegar, which is the reverse of how you would do it during the week. So just sort of reverse the order of the process. And that's your shinui.
Yeah.
Which reminded me of how you might say, like, assemble a table. You do it from the top down as opposed to from the bottom up. Just the reverse of the normal process.
Yeah. Right. And does someone want to get us started in the Beit Yosef on this, where we'll explore more of the details of Gibel? Josie, would you like to?
Absolutely. So we're going to start with Kemach Shel. Okay. Kemach Shel Shinit Yavesh Betanor V'Chulei. בפרק מי שהחשיך, הנרבנן אין גובלין את הקלי, אין גובלין, ויש אומרים גובלין. Mine yesh omrim. So we have this machloket in the Gemara, and who are the yesh omrim? Amar Rav Chisda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. V'hanimili who the mishane. And in this case, it's Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda is saying, you can do this, but you have to do it with a shinui. Heichimishane Amar Avtista al yad al yad. So what is the shinui that they're specifying here? You have to do it little by little. Al yad. Vishavin shiva hushin et hashatit v'shabbat. I sorry, I don't have this copied down here. You're
Well,
I
I think the Shavin Shebachashin at
Right.
Shatit B'Shabbat B'Shotin Zaytun Mitzri. So, there's this equivalence being made between stirring Shatit on Shabbat and drinking this Zaytum Mitzri is how I understood it.
Drink. Right.
Yeah.
The Hamrat and Govlin, and then but on the other hand, we have this. You can't pour water in as the Shulchan Aruch describes. Lo kasha haba ava habaracha. This is not a problem. One opinion is that it's when you're doing it in a thick dough or batter or whatever, and one where it's much less dense. And how is the difference there? Amar Rav Yosef b'chol noten et hachometz v'achar kach noten et hashatit v'shabbat noten et hashatit v'achar kach noten hachometz. So this is what we have later on in the Torah here, where you have this inverted method of doing it all. So we don't have this derech b'chol. You add the liquid to the flour and not the flour to the liquid.
Yeah. So, yeah, before we continue, there seems to be this aspect of asking or of saying, so this restriction on people on it could just be we're saying that you can't do it if it's going to be a thick mixture unless you do a shinoi. But you could read that Biracha, there's no restriction on adding liquid if you're going to be adding it in such a way that it's a thin mixture. So there's a lot of nuance to how we're understanding this, and that's if we're even because first of all, is it an issue to do evil at all? And then if it is, does it matter how thick or thin the mixture will be? Do you need to make some change in the order of how you're mixing it, or even the method if you need to do it me'at? So we're building out that you have to follow a certain procedure in certain circumstances to have it be permissible at all. Yeah, we can continue.
Uperish Rashi Kali, Kamach Shatua, Shanit Yavesh, Kishen Kliot, Batanur, the Osim Imenu Shatit, Mishem and Umayim Melech Morvimbo. So this is sort of how we're interpreting Kali. It's basically it's wheat flour that has been dried or parched and then mixed with in an oven and then mixed with and when you make shatit, you mix it with fat and with water and with salt, then you mix it all up. So you have this slurry of a like a bechamel. Or yeah.
Yeah.
Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. So we're continuing on discussing what's going on in the Gemara. The Rabbi lo mehane le shinui dematnita mayim mechayev. So this can't be the position of Rabbi, and because I don't have the Gemara in front of me, I don't remember. It's the doing it with a shunui has no real impact because as soon as you add in the water, you become chayav here. V'afilu b'midi delav bar gibul mirinan gabe morsin, and I'm sorry, v'afilu b'midi delav bar gibul, even for something that you wouldn't think of, like adding this water to or pouring this water to, like we talk about with morsin, which is the barley, right?
Rob Joel.
I think it's like an oatmeal, essentially, more sun, but something like that in the ancient world.
Okay, I couldn't find it, so I'm glad other people have at least some idea.
It's some other grain water mixture here. But with Rabbi Yossi or Rabbi Yehuda, he says it's not until you get to the sort of this pouring point, yad. You're doing it sort of backhandedly or with this shinui, and they go along this path. Shiva Chushin, so we're going to continue discussing Shiva Chushin. B'tarvod dahainu govlin. And I don't remember tarvod. I don't have this noted either.
A spoon. The tarvod is a spoon, so it's so that you're
mixing it. You're mixing it like with a spoon or.
Yes.
A spoon or a ladle, right?
Yes, and I think we're saying that you can mix with a spoon if we're following Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. Yeah.
Be'ava and Govlin. So this is more just continuing on. In Govlin, Baracha uchashin she'en zolisha. So this is with something that is very thin. You're not concerned about kneading with something that's very, very thin.
Yeah, but now we're seeing Rashi seems to hold that. As I think this is how we're reading it. Rashi seems to hold that even according to Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, you can't do this adding of liquid and even stirring a little bit with a thick mixture. So there seem to be different interpretations about what Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda is permitting. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any impact on this on having cocoa and hot cocoa on Shabbos? A glass of hot cocoa on Shabbos, or kids with those yucky kids drinks, these. Or I'm even going to what kids do at the kids' table at bar mitzvahs, the drinks they make. But maybe there's just smius and there's no problem there. But but the practical implications.
Yeah.
There are also like vegetable.
Or one more. Milk powder for the baby's bottle.
Yeah. Well, I would say that there is, since we ruled like Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, those are thin mixtures, I would say.
Okay.
So there might, there can be different, depending on how we're interpreting the Gemara, who we're following with that. There definitely are ways to mix things, but some would say you need a shinoi, some would say it's thin, so it's totally fine.
And so how would you, Paskin, what would you tell somebody? A
Um,
person who wants to get it right,
I would
wants to be careful, what would you tell them?
I would try to tell them to put the powder in first, then afterward the liquid, just kind of following the idea of with Shita, how that's supposedly a shinoi. And I know we'll see later on someone talking about, well, we don't really have a specific order with how we do things, but if you do in this order, then it's like a shinoi.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I think you're right.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay.
Although, let me take one more step.
Mhm.
And a soup powder, want to have a good broth before you go to shul. And there's a soup powder that has little, it has little vegetables in it,
Hmm. Hmm.
Is that any different? Or you insist on the shinoi?
I mean, I'm not sure. It wouldn't necessarily be cooking the vegetables and how we traditionally understand cooking, but that I would think it might get into certain issues more than less if it's kind of really changing the form, maybe of vegetables and making them like not freeze-dried vegetables.
Okay.
I don't know enough to.
All right. Yeah, Shema daber. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because a freeze-dried vegetable, you're not cooking it, but it's.
Or you could say it's like a cliche you're using, right? That part you were clear, that.
But in other words, but it warrants concern.
Mm-hmm. I wonder. I was thinking about this about instant coffee, right? Could also have the same. Like there may be like just a general principle of if usually we add the solid after the liquid, then we do the opposite on Shabbos.
Mm-hmm.
Well, according to Shmirat Shabbat Hilchot, this is not even a thin substance, a thin mixture. It's a super thin. It's water. He says soluble powders may be dissolved in water, and there's no problem of kneading as long as it creates a liquid. As long as you have a liquid in the end. In other words, it's not even considered a blila raka. It's not a blila ava, not a blila raka. It's just a liquid.
In other words, as long as it dissolves in the liquid and just maintains the liquid form, then we don't worry about it. So,
Yeah, like instant coffee or cocoa.
Okay.
I was talking about religious Jews, but it's okay. It's all right.
You're talking about learned Jews, not the ones who just use Shmirat Shabbat. He says, of course.
All right, that's good. I think we took care of this. Seriously, I think we took care of this. I think have in mind the shinui aspect, and it is different if you put, without even any sort of kula, if you have the solid there, then for sure it's a shinui. Okay, I'm off that topic.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Okay. Do we want to, does someone want to continue? Because we'll get it with the Al-Yad and Beit Yosef, because we will get a different approach to how we might understand Rabbi Yossi than Rabbi Yehuda. Um, um, Josie, do you feel up to continuing?
Sure. The al yad Pirush Harif. So we're going to talk more about what this means according to Rav Chisda. Pirush Harif Ma'at Ma'at. So this is how the Reef is interpreting this. Upasku Arif Harosh Halacha Karabi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. And this is how the Reef and the Rosh are going to paskin. You add things, you can do it adding little by little. Omashma Bigirsat Gemara Midivrei Rashi Zehu Shatit Zehu Kali. And according to the Girsa of the Gemara that Rashi had, Zehu Shatit Shatit is Kali. Lefizeh ayad share ligbul legamre afilu ba'ava uvaracha share afilu ba'ava uvaracha share afilu tuva. So in this case, if you are if you're talking about kali is the same as this shatit, and in this case ayad is says that basically you can soak it completely, and I feel even with a thicker mixture, and with a thin mixture, you can even make a lot of it. And this is when you add the wet to the dry. You put the dry in first, then you add your vinegar. V'chach hem divrei Rabbeinu. V'chein katav harav hamagid beperek kaf aleph b'shem haramban v'harashba b'shem haramban v'harashba ela shechidesh lamar de la Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda be'ava nami mutar afilu tuva. So the Ramban and the Rashba are going to add a little chiddush here, and they're going to say that even with something thick, you can make a lot of it. And so here they're saying is that they're going to innovate, that says you can make even a lot of thick stuff as long as you put the dry in first and then add the wet to it. V'ha'amrat ein govlin hainu dikatani risha ein govlin. And so we have this problem here where we say you don't we say ein govlin hainu dikatani risha, that we have this at the very outset, ein govlin v'Rabbi that Rabbi Yehuda is saying. So we have these two contradictory. So there's this machloket with Rabbi and himself in the Gemara. V'shani kali derisha ba'ava shatit. I'm sorry, kali derisha ba'ava shatit the seifa baracha. And so they're saying that in one case you're talking about the thick version of kali or shatit, and the second you're talking about the thin version. Lidriya kol mutar L'vachush min haracha, kol tzarko. You can, but according to everybody, you can make this this thin liquid as much as you want. Al yedei shinui, with a shinui, benetina tachometz be'acharona, as long as you add the wet to the dry. Lidrei Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda afilu be'ava. And the big difference here is that the way the Ran and the Rosh Paskin, according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, is that you can do it even with thick, as long as you add the wet to the dry and not the other way around. Yes, no, maybe so.
Yeah. Does someone want to look at Aval Harambam, where we look at what if we hold more like Rebbe, where we can't do it's in Goblin, and how would we understand things through that perspective? Yeah. So, Joel, was that you? Joel, was that
I'll
you?
read. I haven't read today.
Okay, great.
Aval harambam katav b'per kaf aleph v'zeh lashono megabel chayav mishum lash. So if you do this gibul, you have violated lash. So this is the gibul, as we said, because according to the Shulchan Aruch, is when you add the water to the solid, right? The two things are together without even kneading them, but that already is a chiyuv of kneading. Lefichach ein megablin kemach kali harbe shema yavol lush kemach she'eno kali. Right? So why can't we, or why, when we add liquid to this parched flour, if we do a lot, because we're going to come to then actually do kneading with regular flour, with unparched flour, uncooked flour. And so it's a derabanan to stop us from doing it with the regular stuff. But you're allowed to do a little bit by little bit, just like we saw. Aval tfuah shelo hevia shalish שכלו אותה ואחר כך טחנו אותה טחינה גסה, דרי כחול, והיא נקראת שתית, מותר לגבל ממנה בחומץ וכיוצא בו הרבה בבת אחד. All right, so you have this like barely rooted grain that you parch and then you grind it up into this thick grind. It's like sand, and it's called, that's what, according to the Rambam, shatit is. You can add water to it, or not water, liquid, which here it's vinegar and something like that. A lot, right, in one go. Mushia rach, as long as it's very thin. Aval kasher asur mimnei shenir ekelash. But if it's thick, you can't do it because it looks like kneading at that point. V'sarich l'shanot, and then only when it's thick do you need to make a distinction. Ketzad, how do you make the distinction? So then you put the grain, the flour in first, and then you put in the vinegar, because that's the shinoi that we saw. And this is how the Rambam's understanding it, and that's only for the thick one that you need to make the shinoi, not for the thin one. Ad kan lashono. That's the end of the Rambam. Hare shapiras the shatit lav hainu kali, right? So for him shatit is not kali. V'chatav hamagid sheneresh she'eno gores v'hamart ein govlin, right? And so he must not have that later part in the Gemara. It says, what? You said that we don't do gibul on Shabbos. Ela v'hatanya ein govlin adkan. Rather, but it's not you, Rebbe, I believe, right? But rather, it was taught in a Braita ein govlin. And so it's not a contradiction of Rebbe on Rebbe anymore. V'Rabbeinu Yerucham katav b'chalek tet ke'ein divrei Rambam demaflig bein shatit lekali. Right, so also Rabbeinu Yerucham makes a distinction between the shatit, right, versus the parched grain flour. Elu shenireh midirav de zitum hamitri hainu shatit ve'eno b'mashma lishna de Gemara. But it seems that if you read Rabbeinu Yerucham, that the zitum hamitri, which we said that everyone agrees on, both Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, that you are allowed to make that on Shabbos. He says that is shatit, but that doesn't seem to be the case because the Gemara seems to make a distinction between those two things. So, but okay.
Yeah. And then how does the Shulchan Aruch pull all these opinions and perspectives together?
He's kind of the Rambam, if I'm correctly, right? Should I
Yeah.
let me read? All right. Now we're in Yud Dalet in the Shulchan Aruch. Yeah, in Shin Kaf Aleph Yud Dalet. Ein Megablin. Then we get. I'll skip the Pirush because we've already done that. Kemach Kali Harbeh. So you can't add liquid to a lot. Well, the order you don't do a liquid parched flour mixture in large quantities. Shema Yavol Alush Kemach She'eno Kali. Lest you come to do this with regular flour. Umutar legabelta kali me'at me'at. But you can do a little by little. Aval tuah shelo hevi ashlish. But if you have some grain of of plants that haven't rooted more than a third, shekaluota ve'achar kach tachanuota techina gasa, and those you parched, and then you grind it up into some thick grind. Sharehu hikechol, just like the Rambam, it's like sand. V'hinek hanikred shatita. That's what we call shatita. Mutar legabel mimena bechometz v'chayotze bo harbe b'vat achad. You can do a lot of that, mix a lot of that with vinegar in one go. V'ushierach, as long as it's a very thin mixture. Aval kasher asur neshenei kelash. But if it's a very let's call it a thick mixture, or that's forbidden because it looks like kneading. All right, and so what do you do? And it's interesting because the Rama adds, or maybe it's the Rama, someone adds in, but afilu berach tzarich lashonot, even with the thin one, which is not the Rambam's language, but they're obviously trying to switch this back to the language of all the other Rishonim we saw, the non-Rambam Rishonim. So what do? You first put in the solid and then you put in the liquid. So just to if you read just the Mechaber on his own, you would say, oh, for thick mixtures, you just like the Rambam said, you first put in the solid and the liquid, and it seems to be that the way that this, I'm assuming this is the Rama or maybe somebody else who's come in and says, actually, you should do this for all liquid solid mixtures on Shabbos. You should always do it with a shinoi. Sounds like the way we should, just like Jacob, you said before to Rav Landis, right? That should be the standard in general. So,
yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think timing wise, we won't look at the Taz or Magen Avraham because I do want to get to looking at some of the mechanics of if we're actually looking at kneading and the physical mixing of it, what are certain parameters there? And I guess I should probably read at some point. So we'll flip back to the tour on Tet Vav and Tet Zion. I'll read Tet Vav and Tet Zion together. Chardal Salashu Be'erev Shabbat L'machar Yachol La'arvo Bein Biyad Bein Bekli V'notein L'tocho Devas. So mustard that was needed on Erev Shabbat, or on the next day on Shabbat itself, one is able to mix it whether by hand or with a vessel, and to put honey into it. V'lo yitrof larvo b'koach, el larvo me'at me'at. And one shouldn't give a lot of strength, almost like prey upon it, literally, to mix it with a lot of strength, but should mix it bit by bit. Then Naim Sedachan Merev Shabbat L'machar Noten L'tocho Yayin V'chomet. I can't remember what shachalayim is. Is that like green onions? I think
I looked it up. It's some sort of plant thing. It's like a plant weed that's edible.
Cress.
Okay.
So
Cress, right? Cress, is that what you said, Max?
that's the name that I saw.
Okay.
The
So-
laws of Rishon, so cress makes sense.
So cress that was ground up on Erev Shabbat for Shabbat, you can put wine or vinegar in it on Shabbat. Lo yitrof marit. So you shouldn't pray upon it, but just mix it. V'chein shum shedachu me'erev Shabbat l'machar noten l'tocho pol the greasing v'lo yitrof ele ma'arev. And so too, garlic that was ground on Erev Shabbat or Shabbat, you can put it in it. And now I'm forgetting pol greasing. And you can put those in it. But again, you shouldn't pray upon it, but just mix it. Uval truma ktav pol ma desari la'arev maska b'chardal davka snatnu mi'ba'od yom. Aval b'shabbat asor l'teit maska b'chardal o b'shum shekatsu mi'ba'od yom. And the Baal Truma writes everything that it's permitted to mix, everything, with that will be permitted with mixing a liquid with mustard, specifically when the liquid was added the day before. But it's prohibited to add the liquid on Shabbat itself in mustard or garlic that was ground on Erev Shabbat. Vadoni avi harosh zechrono levracha katav kisvar rishona. And the Rush writes like the first understanding, where you could add liquid on Shabbat itself. And I guess I'll look at the Beit Yosef on this. So yeah. Fardal Salashu Bar Shabbat Fule Unotin Tofa Devash Vlo Yitrof Bechule Ayim Sadachan Bechule Bechein Shum Sadachu Bechule Ad Ella Me'arev. Let's Hakol Mas Gemara Parak Tolan. So this is from the Gemara. And other people write like this. Uma Shektav Rabbeinu B'Shem Baal Truma. King Katava Mordechai B'Parak HaNizkar V'chein Dat Smag V'Smak Taman Midam Rinam B'Yerushalmi Haiman D'Sachich Tuma B'Chulei Kadyat Hi Maska Chayev Mishum Las. So someone, and the reason for this is written in the Yerushalmi, that someone who's crushed garlic, and one who is adding liquid is chayev because of lush. V'aviu hagot parak bet is also no ktav re'im the ein yodech elok ben shum b'chardal v'tzvayim. Don't know a distinction between these. I'm gonna I'm just skimming to see what I should continue with. I mean, I'm not. Yeah. Okay. So I'll continue with the Chatuv V'Truma Hadeshen because I'll get into some of the parameters of how you can mix things. The Chatuv V'Truma Hadeshen Siman Nun Gimel said Hamam Mishum Dikaima Lan Rabbi Gabe Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda the Savar Nitinat Mayim Osar Maskin Zehu Gibulan Luchach Kiyahiv Maska Mibod Yom Kavar Megubal Hu Ubechol. Right, so this is the Trumat Deshin is saying that the reason of those that hold that you have to add the liquid before is because they hold like Rebbe regarding Gibel being lush and thus a sore. L'kach kiyahiv maska mebilad yom kavar megubalhu b'chol ma'ida arev tu b'spat inkapita rocks lo yitrof aval yahiv maska b'spat anatidat maska hu d'mechayev. Right, so this is, and so if the issue is Gibel, what they're concerned about with mixing further on Shabbat is that you don't do this yitroph, this intense mixing by hand. But if you actually add the liquid on Shabbat, then it's going to be Gibel, and that's certainly chayev. Oh, Josie?
So are we talking about like a distinction between mixing and blending? Like if you want to think about, the trough as like a very intense blending, it's with the idea of devouring, right? As opposed to just tossing your salad, for example, or mixing some dry herbs with some other dry herbs.
I think Joel has something to say, but no, I'm pretty sure I saw somewhere that yitroph, it's kind of the idea of I think it kind of has to do with like the way you're putting your hands on it. It's kind of like a professional, I think someone compares it to. But if you're just the average person, you're just kind of gently mixing with your hands, that's fine. So I'm not sure if it's exactly the blending and kind of breaking things down further. But Rob, Joel, what were you gonna say?
I don't know. I was thinking of it as like, imagine taking a spoon. We'll get into maybe maybe we won't have time to, but like mixing it, you're just like stirring versus like putting in a container and shaking it, right? So yeah, or beating with an egg beater also might be as opposed to just like stirring.
Oh,
Right? Stirring not a problem,
it
but
has to do with how much energy you're exerting. If you're really stirring it quickly, like you would beat an egg with a fork, versus just like folding egg whites into a cake batter. It has to do with how intense your stirring is. It's not about which kli you're using, or you can be using the same kli. Just how intensely you're stirring it.
Yeah, and I think Rob, Joel, I'll add, I think there are some cases where what is permitted is actually shaking the vessel it's in a bit rather than
yeah, there might also be a difference between like just going like this versus like shaking the thing like really strongly.
exactly.
What one potentially modern example is we have these hand soap, things that it's like a little tablet that you put into the container for the hand soap, and then you add a certain amount of water, and you have to really, mix it with your hand in order for it to eventually become, like a sort of foamy hand soap. And I don't know, just one example of a mixing that really does require, it's whatever. It's not food, so I don't know if it's necessarily the same. But
This comes up in my house all the time with mustard. I'm literally adding mustard and like to make salad dressing, right? Adding mustard liquid to make salad dressing, and like how do you mix it and what order do you add them in? So
yeah.
I think Rav Landis wants to.
So Joel, so what do you hold there?
Yeah,
The mustard and the salad. What do you do?
Yeah, it's usually add the mustard first, just because add the solid first. It's different, and then usually mix. I always did it with the back of the spoon, like the other side, like the handle.
Yeah.
Just so this way you can't mix it very hard. But that was just the way I learned. I don't know if there's actually like a good source for that. So.
Mhm. But you're saying no to shaking.
I think like slowly shaking seems fine to me. It's like when you're like vigorously shaking seems like a problem in this case.
Okay.
Yeah. Rav Nachum seems to disagree with me, so it's
Well, again, I think that you're making a mixture that's liquid in the end of the day. I don't think any of it applies.
so only if like it were a paste would it be a problem in that sense.
Yeah. By the way, by cocoa, some people mix a few drops of water with the cocoa first, and then they add the milk so that it mixes better. That might be problematic because first you're making a paste before you add the milk. So you might not be able to do that on Shabbat.
Okay.
But I think that the salad dressing is a liquid and therefore it would be okay.
Maybe I'm being too strict. That's very fair.
Maybe. I mean, I saw the Shmir Shabbat talks about vinegar and water, not vinegar, water, oil and vinegar, not mixing. And therefore you could shake it because it never really mixes.
Yeah. In my house, it always comes with mustard and mustard and vinegar or salad dressing. So
yeah. I think we are out of time. I don't have necessarily a good way to end it. When we're in the middle of this. Yeah, I don't have a good way to end here. Exactly. Yeah.
maybe Jacob, I'm just suggesting maybe you want to say a word about the doing things for refuah versus ochel.
Yeah, I don't. There are ways that doing things for refuah, there's a way that there's a level where I don't remember the source of things for refuah being a sore if it's not really a case of sakana. But there is that aspect that in that kind of line that doing things for refuah is on, that doing things for refuah can be just for the sake of that, even if maybe mechanically, I guess, it would be permitted. You're not really doing a malacha. Doing it for refuah would be a sore until it gets to the point that there's sakana. So it's this thin line that it's dancing on.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Jacob, thank you.
Shukla, thank you.
Oh,
Yeah, and I think we already have the sources from Rav Landis for next week.
Next week is there Pesach Sheni, so
Okay.
bring your matzahs.
Mm.
The catered share. Again, Jacob, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.